like to welcome my guest to this news review, Andrij Dobriansky, Communication Director, Ukrainian Congress Committee of America out of New York, and Jon Stewart, journalist, activist, and political analyst out of Belgrade. Thank you both for being with me. Well, I'll start it off with Andrij in New York. Your take, why do you think the United States is sending these type of weapons or ammunition now to Ukraine?
Well, why now? Because now is the time that the United States is going to give over to Ukraine the kind of systems, the M1 Abrams, that is able to fire them. Second of all, why are these ammunitions being sent? Because these ammunitions are in storage by the United States. For the past 18 months now, over 18 months, what has been happening in Ukraine is that the international community, led by the U.S., has been salvaging confiscated material from terrorist states, including a lot of previously sold Soviet equipment, and handing it over to Ukraine. Now they've been moved on to other equipment that the United States is currently not using. That includes the DPICM, the dual-purpose munitions for the howitzers, which was announced earlier this summer. And now that we have Abrams, now the United States is going to give away or transfer over to Ukraine these munitions to help Ukraine now go past 5,000 Russian tanks, which will have, by the end of October, is estimated 5,000 Russian tanks will have been destroyed in Ukraine.
Okay, Jon, your take. I mean, it just seems like the situation continues to get worse and worse in dealing with this situation. And now we have depleted uranium entering into this war. Your take, Jon, on why the United States would send this type of weapon. And the Russians are saying this type of ammunition is like just inhumane and not just bad for now, but even for future generations. Your thoughts, Jon?
Well, that's already been demonstrated by a number of longitudinal studies following the Gulf War and the war in the Balkans here in this region where I'm based. We've seen elevated levels of cancer, not only among the troops who were inside the armored vehicles that were destroyed, but in the general region. We know now that the radioactive particles, low radioactivity indeed, but the radioactive particles continue to show up in the urine of civilians and military in the region where they've been used for up to 10 years. We've had people reporting urine tests with positive presence of uranium particles up to 10 years after the battle zone. And at the same time, the statistics from the Gulf War show that as many as 25,000 U.S. soldiers suffered from radiation damage or death as a result of the infusion of minor particles of depleted uranium dust, which enters the bloodstream and then can be recirculated in the bloodstream for years. So this is fundamentally a weapon which is a weapon against humanity because it automatically threatens the lives of civilians at any use. It is a weapon that has been banned in many countries, and it is a weapon that will not change the course of the war because, as we've been seeing, both sides are very competent in eliminating the armor of the other side with conventional non-DU weapons. So what is the real reason for the deployment? Very simple. America always serves America's interests first. The DU munitions that they have now have expired and are no longer even as safe as they're supposed to be, which means that the dust will be spread further and they need to get rid of them. Where else to get rid of them than on the cannon fodder battlefield of Ukraine in America's proxy war? So they can then take money from the taxpayer and send it to the companies that put them in office to make new weapons.
Okay. Andrij, your thoughts on that? I mean, we know that if we look at the situation in dealing with the Persian Gulf War and we see the unbelievable type of birth defects that kids were born with for years, and for example, places like Mosul, because of this depleted uranium, is there not a red line as far as what should be used? Even in war, I believe that there are certain red lines because of course, the civilians that also could be affected.
Correct. The red line is civilians, like the child who was killed yesterday, marking the 505th child killed since February 2022. Ukraine has an entire website dedicated to crimes against children, childrenofwar.gov.ua, and you can monitor daily how many children, nearly over 20,000 that have been kidnapped, how many sexual crimes have been they've been victimized with, and that all happens with a foreign aggressor on Ukrainian territory. Without that foreign aggressor bringing their armored vehicles on Ukrainian territory, not a single shot needs to be fired further. And Ukraine, as you well know, is very familiar with birth defects and the tragedy of nuclear material, which is why it was so horrific to the world that Russian military entered Ukraine through Chernobyl, and to the detriment of their own people, their own soldiers, park their own soldiers in their armored vehicles on the irradiated territory of Pripyat and the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, left those soldiers to sleep in those vehicles as the radiation permeated through their system and kicked up all the dust that had been sitting there without military vehicles riding over that ground. It is very clear that there is one aggressor state that is clearly not concerned about the distribution of nuclear materials either in Ukraine or when poisoning people throughout England and Europe with polonium. It is clear that the Russian state is the one that is poisoning people, and what they can do to prevent any further UD munitions from being fired is to remove themselves from Ukrainian territory.
Okay, Jon, your thoughts?
Well, I think that this is a no-go solution that my fellow commentator is proposing now, since the areas that Russia is defending have been annexed by Russia, and Russia doesn't really care whether Ukraine recognizes that annexation. So we're now talking about Russian forces being asked by my fellow commentator to withdraw from what Russia considers to be Russian territory. That will never happen. So we've got dust that will be spread by these munitions. These munitions are out of date and out of use, and America is merely filling its own coffers because they are going to pump the money for the new replacement ammunition from the taxpayer into American companies' hands. And guess who's going to be paying the bill? The Ukrainian people will be indebted for the next 2 to 3 generations while they fight the cancers and the other infections that they get as a result of America's proxy war on Ukrainian and Russian territory.
All right, very sad situation overall. I thank both of you, though, for being with me on this news review. Andrij Dobriansky, Communications Director, Ukrainian Congress Committee of America out of New York. Jon Bosnich, journalist, activist, and political analyst out of Belgrade. And thank you, viewers, for being with us on another news review.